Shalom Aleichem Rabotai. Good morning. We're going to start with our sponsorship. We have a TALMUD TORAH sponsorship this month for the Daf Yomi Shiur in memory of Mr. Milton Marder, Mordechai Dovid ben Rephael HaKohen Zol and his neshama have an aliyah, and a sponsorship from Shirley Elbaum Family in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Shirley's husband, Gerald Elbaum Zol, Yaakov Kopel ben R Avraham Menachem. All of the families should have neshama, and the neshamot will have an aliyah through our learning. Bezrat Hashem. Today's daf is Nedarim Paz. Paz is the finest gold. The Gemara tells us that when Paz went on sale, all the other gold was worthless because Paz is the best of the best. So today will be the best of the best. Every daf is a wonderful daf, an amazing daf, a cathartic and an inspirational daf. But Paz, maybe there's something special. Sometimes on daf Lev in the Gemara, daf Lamed Beis, you get to the heart of the Gemara when you get to Lamed Beis, which is difficult in Makos, where it doesn't go up to Lamed Beis. So that's something. When we get to Bava Kama, just one more. When we get to Bava Kama, Daf Mem Vav, you'll find Shor Shenagach Etapara, the ox that gored the cow, and that's Mem Vav. That's Daf Mu, and that was her last word. So when we get to Bava Kama, Daf Mu, you're going to remember that there's a cheshivas to the letters of the daf, to the words of the daf. We're actually going to pick up on 86 on Pei Vav Amud Beis at the Mishnah, because today we're going to be covering this Mishnah, and this is actually a very critical Mishnah, because we're going to see that when the husband is mefer, is annulling the vow of his daughter or his wife, he has to be specific to the person and the contents of the vow. So the Mishnah here says, Nadra Ishto, his wife made a neder v'savash nadrabito, and he thinks it's his daughter. The Ran says they told him, hey, your daughter made such and such neder, so he thinks it's his daughter. Or you understand, like the Ritva says, that it could be that he hears someone talking and it sounds like his daughter, but his daughter also sounds like his wife. You know, you get this sometimes, you call the house and your daughter answers and you're like, wait, is that my wife or my daughter? You know, okay, you're assuming the ages or, whatever they are. So it could be he's confused about that. Or nadrabito, savash nadra ishto, or vice versa. The daughter makes a neder, and he thinks it's the wife. Nadra ben Nazir, she made a vow of Nizirut, and he thinks that she's designating a korban, that she's making something into a sacrifice. Nadra ben korban, she's making a korban. V'savash nadra ben Nazir, and he thinks that she's becoming a Nazir. So, or nadra mitzainim, or she makes a neder against figs. She does not give a fig. Rabbi say, v'savash nadra ben anavim, and he thinks that she's abstaining from grapes. Or nadra ben anavim, or she makes the actual neder was against grapes. And he's under the impression that it was from figs. So what's the din in all of these cases where there's a mistake? He can go back and mefer again. So even if on Monday he was mefer and he heard a mistake, then on Wednesday when he realizes it was the wrong woman or the wrong nether, he can go back and be mefer. Now what about being mekayim? So the Ran brings it to Tosefta that who a din to mekayim also. If he was mekayim by mistake, it was the wrong woman, or it was the wrong object, or the wrong vow, he can go back and fix it. The Gemara says, L'meimra, are we saying, Yoni ota? Now this is part of the pasuk. Yoni ota means like he will restrain her, or he will annul her vow. So this ota is the definite direct object. We don't really translate it into English, but it means like davka her. That's her. So ota is that davka, is that exactly her, meaning he has to always know and be specific to exactly which woman he's annulling. Now we actually had a case a few weeks ago. We brought the same pasuk, Yini ota. What if the man has two wives? Can he annul both of their nedarim at the same time? And they left it as, I think the Gemara left it as a shaila there because it says ota, maybe that's singular. It means just one girl. Maybe he has to annul them individually, even if both of his wives became a nazirot together. Maybe he'd have to do it individually. So ota could be davka, this one woman. If it's his wife, he has to have specific kavana l'shem yichud to annul the vow of his wife. If it's daughter, specific to his daughter. So is it davka who? Vaha, top of Paz, top of the gold, or both sides. Vaha, but we see gabe crime by tearing kriya lo aleinu. We shouldn't have to do when somebody passes away. And we're going to see not only when somebody in our family, in someone's family passes away, but if you're in the same room when a Jew passes away. If you're there in the cheder, b'shat yitzid neshama, even if it's not a relative, and also if you see, God forbid, a Sefer Torah destroyed, there's an inyan of kriya. There's an interesting, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, that's also, he said that there's a minhag when a Sefer Torah falls on the ground. There's a minhag to fast. And he said, but the problem is people, they're fasting, but they still go to work, and they go to business, and they're taking calls, and they're doing all this stuff, and they're not really getting the ikr, the inyan of the tshuva, of what they're supposed to be mitaken. I mean, even if you didn't drop the Sefer Torah, God forbid, you saw it drop, that's a wake-up call. So Avadia said if it were up to him, he would say, let's let people eat, but they need to go to shul all day, and base medrash all day, and they need to learn, and they need to daven, and tehillim, and they need to really introspect and fix it. He said, but the minhag is to fast, so he says, what am I going to do? I can't change the minhag. So you see, he really, Rav Avadia Yosef was really, I don't know, he was really, really humble in that matter. Anyway, so that's kriya, tearing, and we're going to bring a pasuk that shows that tearing is person-specific. So this otah by the woman, by hafara, is person-specific, and so too by tearing kriya, dichsiv, all, like it says, on. So on a person, dichsiv, the pasuk says, al shol v'al Yehonatan beno, that David the Melech, and he was just becoming the Melech here, when he heard the news that Shaul and Yehonatan had died in war, he tore kriya on Shaul and on Yehonatan. So we see that kriya has to be person-specific. Now this is actually, I will tell you, I admit, in Daf Yomi we're going so fast, we really do not have time to look at the psukim, but it's really kedai to look at these psukim, and this is the very first perek in Shmuel Beit, and the very last perek in Shmuel Aleph, and it's a really interesting place where they switch over from Aleph to Beit, because the last perek 31 in Shmuel Aleph, is talking about the war where Shaul died. Shaul and his 3 sons died in this war against the Plishtim, and we don't have time to get into the intricacies here, but Shaul says to his armor bearer, Shlof charbecha, draw your sword, v'dakreni, and kill me. So he's telling his Jewish attendant to finish him off after he'd been shot by arrows from the Philistines. Lest the uncircumcised come and get me, and they're going to torture me, and they're going to make sport of me, they're going to use me as propaganda. His armor bearer didn't do that. Shaul fell on his sword. It sounds like he was already mortally wounded. He was going to die, and he knew that if the enemy captured him, they would get intel, and they would get a propaganda victory, and they'd parade him around, like the police team did to Shimshon later on. And so it sounds like he killed him earlier. Actually, Shimshon was earlier. It sounds like he killed himself. But in the first perek of Shmuel Beit, what happens is this young man, comes from the war, and he escaped from this battle. He comes to David the Melech to tell him the news, but he says something different. He doesn't say what it said at the end of Shmuel Aleph. This Nar Amaleki, I don't know if he's really Amaleki. It's really strange. They might be calling him an Amaleki because what he did was terrible, or maybe he was from Amalek or second cousin to Amalek. I don't know. But what he tells David the Melech, and this is right where this pasuk all is, he tells him that what happened was that Shaul was mortally injured and asked this young man, to finish him off, and so he did. And it was terrible, and I didn't want to do it, but I killed Shaul HaMelech. And that's right with this pasuk all that David and his people, they ripped kriya, and they fasted, and they mourned on Shaul, and on Yehonatan, his son, and all the Jewish soldiers that had fallen. And then what happens was this guy who told David Melech, he's the bearer of bad news, and he also stretched his hand against the king of Israel, and David Melech has him killed. And I think what's going on here, and I really didn't have time to look at the Farshim, but I think what's going on is this Nar Amaleki, this bearer of bad news, the prototypical bearer of bad news, I think he was bragging and boasting and trying to curry favor with David Melech. Because remember, Shaul, for a big portion of Shmuel Aleph, Shaul was chasing David Melech. Shaul was chasing David. He was a rival to the throne. Shaul many times tried to kill David Melech. David Melech 3 times could have killed Shaul and didn't. So this Nar Amaleki knows that Shaul was a threat to David Melech, and he wants to curry favor with David Melech and get in good with the new king. So he's telling him, yeah, I finished off Shaul, thinking that that's going to make David, accept this young man and promote him and give him prestige. But the opposite. David was very upset that Shaul had died. He didn't want Shaul to die. So we see that David Melech, even though Shaul was out to get him, didn't take it personally. That's one of the reasons that he was zoche to Malchut. And we see in this pasuk that he mourned Shaul and Yehonatan. Yehonatan was his best friend. It was Avash Lo Tlibi Davar. The Gemara explains that there was never a closer friendship, even though they were potentially rivals to the throne, that Yehonatan really loved David and vice versa. And so he mourned Shaul HaMelech just like he mourned his best friend Yehonatan. Now it's interesting, even though there was so much mourning, that there was a problem later on. And you might remember from Yevamot. Yevamot seems like it was forever ago, but this is Yevamot Ayin Chet. And it's a very intense Gemara. There was a famine, a horrible famine. People were dying, and they checked. There were no sins. There were no pledges to tzedakah outstanding. So David the Melech said, it must be my fault. And so he consulted the Urim V'Turim, and they said it was all Shaul v'al asher dam hemita givonim. They said it was because of Shaul and the givonim. And so what was it wrong with Shaul? Al Shaul shelo nifsad kechalacha, that they didn't have a proper hesped for Shaul. Now it's interesting because we just saw this like all they tore kriya, they fasted, they mourned. David Melech composes a song about the battle and about Shaul and his sons falling in battle. It sounds like they mourned, but what happened was David Melech at that time wasn't the king over everyone. He was king in Hebron, and he had his own like army and his own situation going on, but he wasn't the king over everyone operating from Yerushalayim. So now they went back and they made another hesped for Shaul with everyone involved. So we see that the Melech needs everyone involved acknowledging what they did. It's inspirational. Then about the Givonim, we really don't have time today, but the Givonim, remember, were the water bearers for the Kohanim, and when Shaul and Melech had destroyed Novi or Kohanim, they lost their job, and they were unemployed. And we recall from this Gemara in Yevamot Ayin Chet, Amen Tet, they demanded revenge. They demanded that David Melech murder and string up some of the grandchildren of Shaul and Melech. And David Melech consulted Hashem, consulted Ori Tumim, prophetically he was told to go ahead and do it, and it was halachically not a great thing. It's revenge. Revenge is also deraita, but became a kiddush Hashem because the Gemara explains that so many people in the nation saw that in Jewish society, no one's above the law, that there is justice, that it's not like they do a little investigation and then, we didn't see anything wrong, we didn't do anything wrong, we didn't identify anyone who did anything wrong. No, that so when something goes wrong, the people in power are accountable. And that was such a kiddush Hashem that a lot of other non-Jews converted to Judaism. And at that time, David Melech was gozer on the Givonim, the Natinim, that they could not marry Jews because they were the ones demanding revenge. So that's good homework for Shabbos. Yevamot Ayin Chet, Ayin Tet. But it's interesting because here there's mourning on Shaul and on Yehonatan, but then later on it says they needed another hesped. They needed another mourning. That's the Gemara in Yevamot. Great. So we haven't got too far, but okay. We're on the second line on the top of Pei Zayin. So there was Kriya, Davka on each individual, and the Rosh says, the first words of the Rosh in the bottom right corner, Shemina Mina, we learn from here, that all kolmet tzarech likroa. On each individual nifter, each individual death, a person needs to tear. Lo aleinu, but if somebody hears that two people died at the same time, then it would be two kriyot. Vitanya, and there's a brisa, and the Ran says this brisa supports what we're saying. Amru lo meit aviv. They tell him his father died, the korah, and he tears his garment. Achar kach, and then afterwards, nimsa beno. It was, God forbid, lo aleinu, it was his son. So he's under the impression it's father. He tears his garment, but it was the wrong person. Yatsa yedei kriya. He's yotza. He doesn't have to go back and tear again. Amrei loy kasha. They say, no, that's not a contradiction. Ha bestam, ha b'mefarsh. The Ran here says, if they just told him, your relative died, or he died, and what this man thinks, he says, oh my gosh, his father is elderly, he's in the ICU, he's already in a bad situation. He assumes it's his father. So they say, oh, he died, and they see rips thinking it's his father, but he doesn't know, they didn't say it's his father, and it turns out it's his son, God forbid, lo aleinu. So then he's still yotze, because he had stam. He didn't have specific dat to be ripping kriya for his father. He was ripping kriya on his relative. And then it turns out it was the son and not the father. It was the brother and not the father. So okay, he's yotze. Tanya, and there's a brisa like this, Amrulo meit aviv. They told him his father died, the korah, and he rends his garment. Achar kach, and then afterwards, nimsa beno, it turns out God forbid it was the son. Lo yotze yedei kriya, then he's not yotze. So that's when they told him it's his father. So he has kavana in his mind. He thinks it's his father when he tears the garment. Amru lo, they told him, meit lo meit. He died. They say, your relative died. He died. So he might assume it's his father who's in the ICU. Because Savar Aviv, who he thinks it's the father, V'kara, he rends his garments. Achar kachanim sabano. It turns out, God forbid, it was his son, it was someone else. Yotze yedei kriya. He's yotze because he didn't have specific intention. So we see from here, this all about kriya, the same din might apply to otah by the woman that the man is being made for her neder, whether it's the daughter or the wife. So maybe you don't need to know exactly who it is. So why is our Mishnah saying you have to know exactly who it is? Maybe you don't need to know exactly who it is. It says, yeah, I undo the neder. It doesn't matter the wife, doesn't matter the daughter. I don't need to know. I don't want to know what they're doing. I'll annul it. So maybe you don't need to know. That would be, if we compare it exactly to this all lav davka about kriya. Rav Ashi says, Kan betoch kadei dibur. Whereas yahrzeit is within the time of speaking. We're going to define this in a few minutes for both sides. Hang on to your hats. Kan la'achar kadei dibur. And one is after kadei dibur, after he's done speaking. So he explains, when we say is yahrzeit, the kriya, even though he didn't know the specific person who died, shenimsa beno, he found out it was the son, betoch kadei dibur, within the time of speaking. So he thought he was under the impression it was the father, and then they told him, hey, wait, it was, we're sorry to tell you, it's actually the son. So if they told him that soon enough, we're going to see how soon, then he's yahrzeit because his action is still ongoing. We're going to see in the Ran. Hada Amar Lo Yatsa, when he says he's not yahrzeit kriya, la'achar kadei dibur. That's when it was after, when he found out the real fatality after the time of kadei dibur. Vatanya and the Brisa teaches, Mi sheyesh lo chole b'toch beito, someone has a very sick person staying in his house, not a relative, just any person, any Jew. V'nit olef, and this person passes out. Kedome, and he is under the impression shemet, he thinks he's dead. He doesn't see a pulse, he doesn't see breathing. Vikara, and so he tears kriya. Achar kach, and then afterwards, met. And then afterwards, the person shows a sign of being alive. They start breathing again, and then they do pass away. They do end up dying very soon after. Lo yatzah yedei kriya. So he's not yahrzeit kriya. He would have to tear another kriya. Amr Shimon ben Pazi. Shimon ben Pazi adds a chiluk here. Amr Yeshua ben Levi. Mishum bar kapara. Lo shanu elishemet la'achar kadei dibur. That's only if it was really later on. There was a fainting, a kriya, and then a gap in time, a significant gap, and then the actual fatality. Of all betoch kadei dibur, if it's right away, kid dibur dummy. It's like he's still speaking, and he'd be yahrzeit, the kriya wouldn't have to go back and tear again. The hilchata and the halacha l'maisa, toch kadei dibur, kid dibur dummy. There's always this toch kadei dibur sort of buffer in time. Chutz, but there are exceptions. Megadef, God forbid, blasphemy. The Oved Avodas Kochavim, somebody who goes to church. A Mekadesh, someone who marries a woman. Umegarish, and someone who divorces a woman. The Rambam here actually adds being makdish, a carbon, and being meimer, a carbon, doing tumura, switching a carbon for another one. So let's analyze why there is a toch kadei dibur. What is a toch kadei dibur? What is going on here? So the Ran here says he says a couple amazing things. But we're in the wide lines in the Ran under the Gemara, and we're on the fifth wide line in the Ran, and he talks about the exceptions, but then he says in explanation why. So we're kind of, if you go right down from the left airspace gap from the Gemara, straight down 5 lines down in the Ran, venire be'enai, it appears in my eyes. Shebeshar mili, that in other things, the other things that are not these 4 exceptions, the lo chamiri kulehai, things that are not so machmir and so permanent, like a marriage and a blasphemy, God, these are permanent effects. Kisha adam oseyatam, when a person does them, lo begamar daito hu ose. He doesn't do it with complete conviction. He's not totally into it. You understand what we've mentioned before. If someone's making a business deal, we're going to see, if someone's making a business deal, they might say, yeah, I agree. Wait, I back out. And that's allowed in halacha. That's the toch kadei dibur we're going to see. So Ran says, eladaito sheyach halach. His intention, his mindset is he's able to retract toch kadei dibur when he's still right there, right after he's spoken. Aval hani, but these 4 exceptions came into chamiri kulechai. They're extremely machmir. They're permanent effects. Ein adam oseyatam. A man does not do them ele behaskama gemura, with a complete agreement in his mind, a complete conviction. B'shem hachi. So even if he were to retract within kadei dibur, even if it would be megadef, God forbid, blaspheme, and then say, wait, I didn't mean it, that doesn't count. He's still liable, he's still guilty of blasphemy. And he brings another explanation. So according to the Ran, it's an umdina. Umdina is like a standing up, an assumption based on his mindset. So he says, he's going to say it has the status of a deraisa, but he brings another explanation that it's a derabanan. Riti l'Rabbeinu Moshe ben Nachman Zal. That's the Ramban. Beperek Yesh Nochelin. Shekata b'Shem Rabbeinu Tam. He writes from Rabbeinu Tam Zal. The toch kadei dibur kedibur dami takantahu. It's a takana derabanan, a rabbinical enactment. The tikkun rabbanan mishum talmud, because of a student. halokeach mekach, he's in the department store, he's in the shuk, and he's bargaining over a purchase. Upagabo Rabbo, and his Rebbe walks by. Sheyachol litan lo shalom, he's able to greet his Rebbe and be friendly and give kavod, give honor to the Torah, give honor to his Rebbe, and then go back to the business deal. So he's allowed to sort of take that gap in negotiation. He might be saying, yes, 10 shekel per kilo. He might be saying something like this, but then his Rebbe walks by, and he starts talking to his Rebbe for a second, and then he goes back, he says, really, it should be 9 shekel per kilo. He's able to do that, because it's a tekana d'Rabbanan. So he's able to sheyachol to neshalom v'hishba midosa v'kol, and they made an equivalent measurement, a shear for everything, bar mahani, except for these 4 things. These 4 things were not included in the tekana. There's blasphemy and divorce and marriage and avodah zarah. V'lo nichali, the Ran doesn't like the pshat of the Ramban from Rabbeinu Tam. Ki bezdin, because why? Is a court able, matan and lakor davar in the Torah, to uproot something from the Torah? Le'olam b'kumase, forever, with an actual, doing. They're doing against what the Torah says. But Nedarim, elu v'adai k'deram. He says, no, it's like me. So he says, otherwise, if you say Tokadei Dibor is a dirabanan, and Hafar Nedarim is deraita, he says, how could it be this dirabanan is uprooting a deraita, is going against the deraita, that you're saying, well, you were Mekayim, and now you can just Tokadei Dibor, if it's a dirabanan, uproot? He says, no. So he's saying Tokadei Dibor has a status of deraita, not merely of derabanan. Rabbeinu Tam says derabanan, as we've said, because of business dealings. Someone's allowed to greet his Rebbe. So how do you greet a Rebbe? Because that's shaykh. We don't know yet how much is Tokadei Dibor. So it's brought lehalacha in the Shulchan Aruch, which is in my telephone. It's in Yeridea 242:16, Reish Mem Beis in Yeridea. Lo yitin shalom l'rabbo, v'lo yachzir lo shalom kederech shar ha'am. Someone's greeting his Rebbe, and we're talking really about a Rebbe muvhak, a Rebbe that he's learned most of his chachma from, has this special status, this special kavod that we're talking about in Reish Mem Beis, the Shulchan Aruch. So you don't greet the Rebbe like you just greet your buddy on the street. You just say, hey, how's it going? You never say, hey, how's it going to the Rebbe. Ela shoche lefonav, he should pause in front of him, Ve'omer lo b'yira v'kavod, and say with yira and kavod, things we've been talking about in Mesilat Yesharim in the morning. Shalom alecha Rebbe, shalom alecha Rebbe. V'im natan lo Rebbe shalom. If the Rebbe got him first, the Rebbe said shalom first. Omer lo, you have to tell the Rebbe shalom alecha muri v'Rebbe. You add something on. If the other guy gets you first, you add something on. You give him an extra bracha. So it sounds like it's something that's not done shalom alecha Rebbe. It's not like a 2-second thing. It sounds like a man has to pause and look his Rebbe in the face and give him a real gishmak shalom, give him a bracha. Saying shalom aleichem, it's a bracha. It's not like hello. Hello is like meaningless. Good morning already is a bracha. Good morning is nice. Someone says good morning, you can say amen. He's giving you a bracha. But shalom aleichem is definitely a bracha. Shalom is a name of Hashem. Shalom aleichem, it sounds like something you've got 2 or 3 seconds, maybe 4 or 5 seconds. So the Achronim, they say maybe it's 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds. If they're still in the same subject matter, you can tell if someone's in a business deal and they're talking about the specifics and the kilos and the prices and things like this, and then they turn to something else, they're definitely not within Tokadei Dibor. But there's a little bit of wiggle room, it sounds like. Some say 2 or 3 seconds, some say 4 or 5 seconds. Is this Tokadei Dibor? And what it sounds like from the Ran who says it's an umdana, has the status of deraisa, from the Ran, it sounds like it's not that we say, oh, it's a zechus chazora, that he's allowed to retract. It's kind of like Rabbeinu Tam says. It sounds like we view time, we have a halachic understanding of time in these increments of Tokadei Dibor, that things aren't instantaneous. Like you say the word and you're done and it's gone forever. It sounds like typically in halacha, except for these exceptions, that you have sort of this zechus chazara. And we actually see this in the Siddur, in Hilchos Tefillah, if somebody made a mistake and they need to change their davening between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, they said Kela Kadosh, they need a Melech HaKadosh. If they're right there, Tokadei Dibor, 2 or 3, 4 seconds, they're allowed to go back. And that's a valid substitution. It's a valid tefillah because according to the Ran, we look at time in halachic increments. Now we're going to see in Bava Metzia, we talk about Tokadei Dibor, retracting. It's always talked about in a business sense. It sounds like the Rabbeinu Tam's pshat. It's a takana. It's a takana d'Rabbanan. You can greet your Rebbe and go back to business. But this Gemara right here, it really sounds like we're talking about an Indian deraisa, Hafarid Nedarim. It sounds like the Ran's pshat is pretty good. I'm not arguing with Rabbeinu Tam. I'm not arguing with the Rambam, but the Ran is. And the Ran sounds pretty good, Rabbosai. So he sounds like it's deraita, that we understand time in these increments. Time is not instantaneous, that we have a bit of a zechus chazara. So it's an amazing lesson. And when we do something wrong, we should try to fix it right away, instantaneously. We should try to be like, oops, Let's turn around. Let's fix that. Let's fix the tefillah. Let's fix what's going on, and move on to better things. Good. So that is Toch Kedei Dibor. This is a very important Ran. It's an underlined Ran. It's a good one. So go back and underline it before Shabbos, please. So the Mishnah, Omer Amra, she says, the wife or the daughter, she says, Konam Ta'anim Ve'anavim Elu Shani Thomas. She says, I'm making a neder. Remember, Konam from the first parak is slang for a carbon, slang for making a neder against this. So she's saying, these figs and these grapes are a carbon. I can't eat them. So she's going on a low-sugar diet. Kiyam l'tainim, and the husband or the father, he was Mekayim. He established and affirmed the neder with regard to the figs. Kulo Kayim. So the entire neder is Mekayim. He says, I'm Mekayim you for the figs. And she said figs and grapes. So the Mishnah says it's all Kiyam. It's all binding. Hafer l'tainim, he invalidates, annuls regarding the figs. Eina mufer, it's not a hafara. Ad sheyafer aflanovim. He has to mention the grapes as well. So he has to be specific in annulling that he's annulling both of them. But by affirming, it sounds like he doesn't have to affirm both of them. The Gemara is going to explain why this is. Amra konam tse'ena shani tu'emet. She says, I'm taking a neder, a konam, against this one fig that I'm eating, ve'anava, and this one grape, that I'm not going to eat this one grape and this one fig. Harei elu shnei nedarim. This is two different nedarim. Why she said, konam tse'ena shani tu'emet, ve'anava shani tu'emet. She's saying shani tu'emet 2 times. She's making it into 2 separate nedarim. And so the din is going to be, he can affirm each separately or annul each separately. So now the Gemara is going to have to figure out, how can this be that the affirmation, a partial affirmation is a full affirmation, but a partial revocation is not a full revocation? Mani Masnisin, who is that? Who holds like this? Because we've actually seen in previous prakim, we've seen that we have a concept, a neder shehufar miktzata hufar kulo. That if you undo part of a neder, you're undoing all of the neder. We're going to see who that is later on in Amid Beis. So Mani Masnisin, who is this Mishnah who holds that a partial hafara is not a full hafara? Rabbi Yishmael, that's a Rabbi Yishmael Mishnah. The Tanya, the Baraisa says, Isha yekemenu v'isha yifreinu, a pasuk we're familiar with. Her husband will uphold it, or her husband will mefer, will annul it. Amra, if she says, and then it brings an example. She says, Konam ta'anim v'navim elu shni tuemes. She says, I'm taking a vow against these figs and these grapes that I can't eat them. Kayim l'ta'anim, and the husband or the father, he establishes, affirms it regarding the figs. Kula kayim, so that affirms everything. On Talmud base, hafer l'ta'anim, he annuls with respect to the figs. Eina mufer. It's not a valid hafara. He does not annul the vow. He has to annul the grapes. Also, divrei Rabbi Yishmael, and that's according to Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva Omer, but Rabbi Akiva has a different opinion. Harehu Omer, he says, doesn't the pasuk say, Isha yikimenu, v'isha yifarenu? It puts them both together. It says her husband will mekayim, will affirm that vow, or her husband will annul the vow, will make for the vow. They puts them right together. It's like they're samuch. They're right next to each other. Ma yikimenu mimenu. Just like being mekayim, yikimenu is any part of mimenu. If he's mekayim any part of it, af yifrenu mimenu. So too, when he's mefer, it's any part of it. So what the Ran explains is yikimenu has this linguistic, this grammatical letters mem nun vav menu, which literally means from it. So it's sort of this drasha that both Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva are making. Yiki menu is yakim mimenu. So when you see this, that a mem sort of menu from it, that a mem in certain words in scripture, we can sort of have this implied drasha from it. So yiki menu mimenu. So Rabbi Akiva's argument is, just like we have this implied drasha, yiki menu, when he's affirming part, he can affirm even mimenu, even part of it. It's valid for all of it. Af Yifrenu, because Yikimenu and Yifrenu are put together, so too when he's made for part, he's made for all of it. Rabbi Yishmael says, he answers Rabbi Akiva, Mikasiv Yafer Mimenu. It says Yikimenu, which we can read, we can have a drasha, Yakim Mimenu. He's establishing some of it, he establishes all of it. But by Yifrenu, there's no mem there. It's not Yafer Menu or Yafer Mimenu, it's just Yifrenu. There's no mem. There's a nun, but there's no mem. So he says. So Yishmael says, Rabbi Akiva, your drasha is not good. fine, you have a hekesh, Yifreinu Yekimenu, but I don't, and you have this, and we both have this drasha Yekimenu, Mimenu, but your logic is no good. So after Yifreinu Mimenu, Rabbi Shmuel, Mikasiv Yafer Mimenu, he says, it's not written Yafer Mimenu. Rabbi Akiva, Maki Shafar L'Hakama. So Rabbi Akiva has this hekesh, because they're right next to each other, they'll have the same halacha, they're in the same pasuk, it's the same action, the same person. So he's Maki, puts them together, the dinim, the laws of Hafara and Hakama. Ma Hakama, just like Hakama, affirming a vow, Mimenu, even part of it, because Yakimenu, even part of it works. Af Hafara, Mimenu, so too, annulling a vow, even annulling part of it, is valid. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Chia bar Abba says, Rabbi Yochanan, Zo Divrei Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva. He says, this Baraisa explains the reasoning of Rabbi Yishmael, who's also in our Mishnah, and Rabbi Akiva, that they have this drasha, Yikimenu Mimenu, and Rabbi Yishmael does not extend Yikimenu to Hafara, just to Hakama, and Rabbi Akiva does. He has a hekesh to compare Hafara to Hakama. Aval Chachamim, but the other sages, Omrim, they say, Makish Hakama L'Hafara. They have a hekesh, but not this Mimenu. They don't care about this Mimenu so much, but about the hekesh that Hakama and Hafara go together. Ma Hafara, Ma Hafer, whatever he annulled, Af Hakama, Ma Shakiyam, Kayam. So too, when he's upholding, whatever he's upholding is valid as an upholding. So as we learned before, that in the Gemara, I don't remember exactly which daf, that when someone undoes part of a neder, they undo all of a neder. And so too, it sounds like the being Mekayim the neder, it also sounds like this too. So it sounds like if the husband was just said, she mentioned figs and grapes, if he says just the grapes, it sounds like he's Mekayim for the grapes, it sounds like he's Mekayim all of it as well. So the Gemara cites the Mishnah, Amra Konim Taina. She says, I'm making a vow against a Taina, against one fig. It sounds a little strange in the Mishnah, right? She's taking a vow against one fig, or one fig and one grape. It sounds like she's got one grape on her plate. I'm taking a vow, swearing I'm not going to eat this one grape. So it sounds weird, but then you realize there's a halacha, you can't eat just one. So you've heard of this, but there's like potato chips or something. I don't know which brand it is. There's potato chips out there. Lay's. So Lay's potato chips, you can't eat just one. That's actually a valid halachic statement. So what this woman is doing, she's saying, I'm not going to eat this one grape, or this one grape and this one fig. So that's good, because a grape and a fig together add up to a kazayas, and you can't eat just one. That's a taisvus in brachas. It's not ad copy. It's not an ad slogan. It's a taisvus in brachas lamed tes. The taisvus says you can't eat just one. Trademark. He didn't trademark. He should have trademarked it. That would have been smart. So the topic there is shiurim by brachot, is the amount of food you need for brachot. We went from Nedarim to the Yivamo to brachot. Okay, good. So what the Gemara says is, when we say the shiur is a kazayit for brachot on food, it says that's for the after bracha. For the bracha rishona, the bracha when you start, a kosher, any amount, even like one little sprinkle that fell off the cake, you should get a bracha. But for after bracha, you need a kazayit. But the Tosfot brings that's not so pashut, because what if you ate one grape? One grape might not be a kazayit. In fact, it usually isn't, but it's called a birya. Some say a bria. Birya, same thing. It's a creation. It's a unit of creation. It's a single grape or single fig, a single zayit. Now, it's interesting because a zayit is not a kazayit. It used to be. A zayit used to be a kazayit. Kazayit is about, 28 grams. It's about an ounce. So the ancient kazayit in Eretz Yisrael before the Churban, before the Romans came in and killed out all the flora and fauna, the Romans were not environmentalists. They killed out the native species of grapes, the olives that were very large and very plump, and they brought in their own, not as good stuff. Thank God, Baruch Hashem, the grapes in Eretz Yisrael are getting better. I don't know if they're more plump and bigger, but the wine from Eretz Yisrael, Baruch Hashem, we can endorse wholeheartedly. But anyway, the Romans killed the original species of zayit that was actually kazayit. So now the zayit we have nowadays, the Gemara explains, they're not a kazayit. You need 2 or 3 olives to actually get a kazayit. So what if somebody eats 1 olive? So they didn't get a kazayit. So they made the bracha rishona. They made brei priyatz. But the alaetz, the main shalosh, the bracha rishona, they can't do because they don't have a kazayit. But since they ate a birya or bria, maybe they are chayav because it's a unit of creation. So maybe they do need to make the bracha. Therefore, Tosfot says the halach conclusion is you can't eat just one. You're not allowed. The Shulchan Aruch brings this l'halacha. So this is halacha l'maisa. You can't eat 1 grape. You can't eat 1 olive. You can eat maybe one fig if it's big enough, plump enough, a date or a fig. If it's big enough, if it's kazait, you're not allowed to eat one grape or one olive. You can't eat just one. You have to have 2 or 3 or 4 until you get your kazait, and you can make your bracha achrona. Because there's a suffix. If it's a birya, even one grape, you might need a bracha, but we don't make a bracha out of suffix. So you kind of quasi-stuck. So you can't eat just one. That's a valid halachic statement. And this woman is making a nether against one grape because there's a chashivas in one grape. It's a birya, it's a bria. So she needs a bunch of grapes in order to make an after bracha. It's also interesting. While we're on a tangent, let's go on another tangent. Is this woman knows the halacha about brachas? We find in other places in the Gemara there are women who ask kashas on a halacha, or they ask kashas on the explanation of a pasuk. There's a Gemara we had in Kesuvos. There was a crazy case where they did a get and they paid it, and the husband ended up holding the get, and the woman ended up holding the receipt for payment. And then years later, they're like, whoops, I've got the wrong documentation here. This is a big problem. So they say, well, what was she supposed to do? And the Gemara says, she was supposed to read it. She's supposed to read it. Now, why is that weird that women knew halacha and psukim? 2,000 years ago, if you're familiar with history, 2,000 years ago, 99.9% of humanity could not read. We don't realize this, on a regular basis. Not until like 200 years ago, maybe 500 years ago, with the printing press in some places, we had people actually knew how to read. I'm talking about people besides Jews. Jews are the people of the book. We see even 2,000 years ago, Jews could read. This is why Rabbi Akiva was so upset. He couldn't read and write. He was so upset because most of them could. We see even Jewish women could read and write. It wasn't until in very recent history, in just the blink of an eye in the historical view, that most people could read and that women were educated and could read, but Jewish women could read. So this Jewish girl is making it, she's aware of the Taisvos on Brachas Lamed Tes. That's good homework also. It's the top Taisvos Batzer in Brachas Lamed Tes about the Shirim, about you can't eat just one. That's a good one. So she was aware of this. So she was making a vow against one grape and one fig. I'm not going to eat these. She's going on low sugar diet, but she has a chashivas to one grape, one fig. So that's the Taisvos. You can't eat just one. And that's, Baruch Hashem, you should appreciate being the people of the book. We could read and write. Our women could read and write and study halacha 2,000 years before everyone else was doing it. So we have a little bit of a Baruch Hashem, a head start. So we got to keep going. Baruch Hashem, we got to keep learning. But thank God we have a head start. So she's making this vow against one grape, one fig. Amarava Masnisin Rabbi Shimon. He says our Mishnah is actually Rabbi Shimon. This part of the Mishnah is Rabbi Shimon, not Rabbi Shmuel. The Amar Ad Yomer Shavua Kol Echad Be'echad. Rabbi Shimon says a person's not chayev until there's a shvua on each one. So the Ran says what we're talking about is when somebody denies knowing testimony or denies paying money. It's called the shvua sapikadon. He had 5 people show up at the same time. And they all said, hey, you owe me money. You can imagine the guy just rolled back into town from a business trip, and the 5 people he borrowed money from before the trip, they all show up at once, and each of them say, you owe me the money. And he denies, he makes a blanket denial. He says, I don't owe anybody money. Making a shvua, I don't owe anybody money. Then if it turns out he did owe them money, so it's a shvua spikadon, and he's high of malchus. He gets lashed for denying this. But if he only made one shvua, he's chayav once. If he made a shvua for each of the 5 guys pressing him for the money, he's chayav each time. So Rabbi Shimon said he has to make the shvua separately to each of his creditors who are accusing him in order to be chayav. So he says that part of the Mishnah is like him. So good. So let's read this Mishnah, even though we're not going to get into the Gemara today. We'll leave it for Shabbos. So the Mishnah says, Yodeya ani sheyesh nedarim. I know there's such thing as nedarim. Aval eini yodea sheyesh mafirin. I didn't know I could be mefer. So this is a husband who's, he says, I'm familiar with the concept of nedarim. I've heard of this far as nedarim thing, but I don't really know the pratim. I don't really know the details. Yafer. So he can then mefer, and we're talking about later on. So what's going on here is on Monday, his wife or his daughter made a vow, and he heard about the vow on Monday. So technically, how long does he have to annul it? That day, Monday, until Shkia, until the day is done. But he didn't realize, he doesn't have the mindset, he did not come to Daf Yomi, and he did not learn Nedarim, and he doesn't have the mindset that he's allowed to hear the vow and then annul it. He doesn't know he has to annul it that day, he doesn't know he can annul it. So he's allowed to annul it later. It's not considered Yom Shmiyah, it's not considered the day of his hearing, until he hears the vow and he knows he has the power to annul it. So it's interesting because sometimes we live in a situation that's not ideal, we feel like we're stuck in a rut, and then we find out, we get new knowledge. We start learning Mesilas Yesharim, we get new knowledge, and we realize that this situation's been going on for a long time, but we realize we have the power to undo it. So the time to act is now. Now that we have the knowledge to change, even though the situations are going on for months, for years,
whatever midos we're hanging on to that are not gishmak, that are not appropriate for us, once we have the knowledge to change it, it's upon us to change it right away. So Mish continues, he says, I know I have the power to annul Nedarim. I don't know this statement was a neder. Maybe she said konam, she used a weird slang word to make a neder. So the husband wasn't really aware that what she said was a halachically valid neder. He knows he has the power to annul Nedarim, but he didn't know this specific lashon was a neder. So Rabbi Meir Omer lo yafer. Rabbi Meir says, no, he's stuck. He should have figured it out. He should have inquired if he could be mefer. He should have been mefer anyway. Chachamim Omrim yafer. They say later on when he finds out that if his wife made the neder on Monday and the wording was strange, he didn't realize it was a halachically valid binding neder. Then on Wednesday he finds out, that was a binding neder. She's a nazira now. She can't drink the wine anymore. So at that time he can be mefer. Rabbi Meir says can't be mefer. So it's another thing. It's another Mordic concept to be aware of is if there's a potential problem, it might be a problem, go ahead and try to fix it now. Go ahead and get it under the wire. We actually have lahavdil. We have a concept in the government. I work for the government, and there's time limits to submit things and time limits to submit objections to government actions. And if somebody sends us a letter, even though the letter doesn't make any sense, it has nothing to do with nothing, but Lamaisa, they sent us the letter before the time limit, so good, fine. So we accept that, we'll give them an extension of time, and we'll let them submit something that's actually a valid statement, a valid argument later on. We have 3 minutes left, so I just want to say one really interesting thing in the Tanakh that I didn't think we'd have time for, is we remember that Shaul HaMelech lost his malchus. Why? Do you remember specific what he failed to do that the Navi said he lost his malchus for? Amalek. So what happens, it's an amazing thing, at the end of Shmuel Aleph, what happened was that David HaMelech had his own army. So Shaul had the official army, the official malchus, and David HaMelech had this breakaway army, breakaway malchus. So you see, it's not a new thing to have a breakaway minion. David HaMelech and Shaul, they had the same thing going on. So David had this breakaway army. He had 600 armed men, trained men. They were very successful. They'd been fighting Plishtim. They were very good at defending Am Yisrael. That's how David HaMelech got famous. He was defending Am Yisrael. And Shaul had the official army, the larger army. And what happened is this amazing thing. The Amalekim, and it's interesting because most of the Amalekim did get killed by Shaul, and he left a few survivors, the animals, the king, but there were other survivors. As was mashma, is that Shaul did not pursue and wipe out all of the Amalekim. So then what happens is these Amalekim who survived, they come after David HaMelech, and they attack Tziklog, his city where he was living, and they take away the women and the children and everything. And David HaMelech and his soldiers are very upset. They ask Or Mitzvah, they say, go and chase the Amalekim. So Hashem tells David HaMelech, go and chase the Amalekim and get back the women and the children and everything. And so David HaMelech goes off chasing the Amalekim. And then meanwhile, the Plishtim attack, and Shaul HaMelech takes the official army to go fight the Plishtim, and that's where he falls and dies in Gilboa. Whether he fell at his own sword or he was killed by the Nar Amaleki, it sounds like it's not so pashut. There's different versions. Sounds like the Nar Amaleki was lying. But can you imagine if Shaul HaMelech had killed out all of the Amalekim, they would not have been there to harass David HaMelech and his breakaway army. David HaMelech would not have needed to chase after them to get back the women and children, and David HaMelech's little breakaway army would have been available to help Shaul and protect Shaul against the Plishtim. So even though you sound like, okay, so Shaul HaMelech lost the monarchy because he didn't wipe out Amalek. Okay, great. But then later on at the very end of Shmuel Aleph, the very beginning of Shmuel Beis, you find out, yes, exactly, because Amalek was still around, David HaMelech had to fight with them and was not available to save Shaul HaMelech from the Plishtim. Amazing, amazing thing. So Tzarchian and the Tanakh, Baruch Hashem, we learned some Tanakh today, learned some Halacha L'Maisa today. You can't eat just one. Shkoyach Rabosai, Shabbat Shalom. Good Shabbos.